March 6, 2024. A day that began like any other for two women. Ukrainian refugees who had fled their war-torn homeland in search of safety in Germany. The mother and her 51-year-old mother had come to trust a couple who claimed to be volunteers offering support. What they didn't know, what no one could have known, was that this seemingly kind couple had orchestrated a plan so cold, so calculated, it would shake the world. In a quiet corner of Germany, just outside the city of Heidelberg, a husband and wife had spent months preparing for this moment. For them, it was the final act in a desperate, almost obsessive quest. A quest that would end with the brutal deaths of two women and the abduction of an innocent child. Their goal wasn't revenge or hate. It was far more chilling. The couple wanted a baby, a child of their own. After years of miscarriages and failed fertility treatments, they had made a decision. Not to adopt, not to foster, but to steal. A helpless infant, raised in their home, as if it had always belonged to them. And they would stop at nothing to make this happen. This wasn't a random act of violence. This was the culmination of months of manipulation, deception, and planning. The couple had been pretending to be pregnant, pretending to offer help. They had gained the trust of the victims, two refugees living in Germany, who had no reason to question the kindness of strangers. But behind the scenes, they had been preparing for murder. This is a story about the vulnerability of those seeking refuge, the darkest corners of human desperation, and the chilling reality that sometimes the most dangerous threats come from the very people you trust. On March 6, 2024, a brutal crime was set in motion. The next morning, two bodies would be found, and a child, only 5 weeks old, would vanish from the world. But how? How had this happened? Who were these people? And why? Stay with us as we unravel the details of a case so disturbing, it would leave a community reeling in shock. This is the story of how a seemingly ordinary couple, in a desperate bid to fill the void of their shattered dreams, became capable of unthinkable acts. The crime was not only horrific, it was meticulously planned. A chilling reminder of the lengths to which some will go when driven by a singular, obsessive desire. On the victims, the early months of 2024 were a time of uncertainty for millions. The war in Ukraine had displaced entire families, forcing them to leave behind everything they knew: homes, jobs, friends, and their loved ones. Among those displaced was a 27-year-old woman, a mother to a 5-week-old baby. She and her 51-year-old mother had fled their homeland, seeking refuge in Germany, hoping for peace, for safety, for a new beginning. But for them, safety would remain out of reach. Their story, one of hope in the face of unimaginable tragedy, would soon be overtaken by a nightmare that no one could have foreseen. In the months leading up to March 2024, the war had left deep scars on the people of Ukraine. Families, forced to leave their homes as bombs fell and cities crumbled, found themselves scattered across Europe, seeking asylum in countries that could offer refuge. Germany, a country known for its asylum policies and relative stability, had become a destination for many refugees. But for the woman and her mother, who had left Ukraine in search of sanctuary, Germany would turn out to be a place of horror. Life in Germany had been difficult but filled with hope. They had secured a small apartment, a modest start, but it was theirs. And their baby, the child who had been born in the chaos of war, was their light in the darkness. The mother and grandmother cared for the infant together, as they had always done. Two generations trying to heal from the wounds of war, looking to the future with optimism, no matter how uncertain. The woman and her mother had never expected to meet people like the couple who lived just miles away from them in Sandhausen, Germany. They had found them online, through a Telegram group that claimed to be offering assistance to refugees. The couple, the woman and her husband, had presented themselves as volunteers, kind-hearted, trustworthy, and there to help. They were even offering translation services, a lifeline for the refugees trying to navigate a foreign land with a language barrier that could seem insurmountable. For those seeking a way to survive in an unfamiliar place, the offer seemed like a small but important gesture, a chance to make life just a little easier. The woman and her mother, like so many others, had little reason to doubt the intentions of this couple. After all, who would question help when you're living with the constant pressure of uncertainty, when your future is anything but guaranteed? It was that vulnerability, that desperate need for support, that the couple had sensed. And it was that need they would exploit. They had been in contact with the victims for weeks. The couple had positioned themselves as friendly, welcoming strangers, even going so far as to offer a warm invitation, a meal at a local restaurant. It seemed harmless. They were, after all, offering help. The refugees, grateful for anything that could make their lives easier, agreed to meet them. In the days leading up to March 6th, the 27-year-old mother and her mother prepared for the meeting. They dressed in their best clothes, trying to present themselves with dignity despite the hardships they had faced. They talked about their hopes for the future, the small dreams that refugees clung to, like the desire to find steady work, to secure their family's safety, and to heal from the trauma of war. The infant, just 5 weeks old, was their anchor in this new world. She represented the future, the promise of a life beyond the destruction of the war. But for all their preparation, for all their hopes, they couldn't have known that they were walking into a trap. As the pair made their way to the restaurant on that fateful day, they had no idea that the very people they trusted were already putting their plan into motion. The couple, who had made sure to appear friendly, understanding, and empathetic, had no intention of offering them help. Instead, they had prepared a deadly course of action. A course of action that would forever alter the lives of these two women and the innocent child they cared for. The meeting at the restaurant was supposed to be a simple exchange, perhaps some advice or friendly conversation. It would end in death, in violence, in the final betrayal of trust that would haunt every corner of this story. Meanwhile, the refugee mother and grandmother had no idea that the couple had been meticulously preparing for this moment for weeks. They had given them a false sense of security, leading them to believe that they were only there to help. In reality, the couple had already decided their fate. They had planned to kill them and abduct the infant, an infant they had already convinced themselves would fulfill their deepest desires. But in that brief moment, as the victims walked toward their meeting, the reality of the situation had yet to settle in. Their world was about to change in the most violent way imaginable, and they had no way of knowing that the promise of safety they had sought would soon be shattered. They were vulnerable, not only because they were refugees, but because they had placed their trust in the wrong people. And now, with every step they took toward that restaurant, they were walking straight into the unknown. The quiet before the storm was about to break. In the quiet town of Sandhausen, just outside Heidelberg, Germany, the lives of a seemingly normal couple had been quietly unraveling. On the surface, they presented themselves as average individuals, a middle-aged couple with children of their own, living an ordinary life. But beneath the facade, there was something far more complex, something that would drive them to commit an unspeakable act. The couple, both in their early 40s, had spent years navigating the highs and lows of family life. They had 4 children together, but their dream of expanding their family had always been fraught with heartache. Multiple miscarriages, failed fertility treatments, and the relentless passage of time had slowly eroded their hope. They had tried everything, it seemed: doctors, medications, invasive procedures, all in a desperate bid to conceive again. But each attempt ended in sorrow, each pregnancy lost before it could fully take root. For the wife, especially, the emotional toll was profound. It wasn't just the loss of potential children, but the growing emptiness that seemed to seep into every aspect of their lives. It became a haunting, gnawing presence, a relentless reminder that their dream of a larger family was slipping farther and farther out of reach. Their existing children, while loved, couldn't fill the void. And so, the couple's obsession with the idea of having a child became all-consuming. In the midst of this struggle, something in them shifted. The desperation that had once been confined to private moments now found a more dangerous outlet. They began to look at the world differently, not as parents who had tried everything and failed, but as individuals who could control their future, no matter the cost. Their obsession soon turned toward a shocking, twisted solution. If they couldn't have a child of their own, they would take one. At first, the idea seemed unthinkable, but over time, it festered, and it took hold. They began to plan, carefully, quietly, and with chilling precision. The wife, who had spent countless hours scrolling through online forums about fertility and parenting, now turned her attention to something else. She had discovered a Telegram group, a forum where volunteers helped refugees, particularly those from Ukraine, navigate the complexities of settling into life in Germany. This was the break they needed. The group was full of displaced families seeking aid, some looking for translation assistance, others simply desperate for information about how to survive in a foreign country. It was the perfect opportunity. The couple, ever so cautious, joined the group under a false identity. They presented themselves as compassionate volunteers eager to assist refugees in need. Their goal wasn't simply to help, it was to gain trust, to become familiar faces among the vulnerable. They began offering help, volunteering time, responding to messages, and connecting with refugees through the platform. They knew that their involvement had to be more than just surface level. They had to establish themselves as dependable, trustworthy, and kind-hearted. They became known within the community. Little by little, they gained the trust of the refugees. Mothers who were alone in a foreign land, families struggling to find their footing after fleeing the chaos of war. And that's when they found the woman, the Ukrainian mother. She was just what they had been looking for. A young mother, new to Germany, trying to build a new life for herself and her baby. She had fled the war in Ukraine, hoping to find peace, only to find herself caught in the trap set by this couple. They were meticulous in their approach, never rushing, never showing too much enthusiasm. They knew better than to push too hard. Instead, they offered help when needed, casually chatting with the mother and grandmother through messages. But all the while, they were laying the groundwork for something much darker. The husband and wife had, by now, convinced themselves that this was the only way. The only way to satisfy a need that had consumed them for so long. The need to raise a child of their own. They weren't willing to adopt, they wanted a baby born of their own design, raised as their own flesh and blood. And the couple had already made up their minds about the mother and grandmother. They were expendable. The deeper the couple went into their plan, the more twisted their thinking became. They spent weeks pretending to be pregnant themselves, fabricating a story to make their lies even more convincing. They constructed a fake pregnancy and talked about their unborn child, knowing it would make them seem more credible. To the woman and her mother, they were no longer just strangers offering help. They were people they could trust. People who understood what it was like to want a child. People who sympathized with their struggle. And that trust, so carefully cultivated, was about to become their undoing. Every step of the way, the couple was patient. They knew that desperation can cloud judgment, that the most vulnerable people are often the easiest to deceive. They played their parts perfectly, always moving slowly, always keeping the victim at ease. And when the time was right, they made the invitation. A simple meal at a restaurant. An opportunity to meet in person. The stage was set. The couple had lured the refugees into a trap with ease, never once revealing their true intentions. All the while, they had meticulously prepared for the moment they would strike. They had planned every detail, knowing that their lives, their future, would be forever changed in the course of one violent act. But as the woman and her mother made their way to the restaurant, they had no idea that the very people they trusted had already decided their fate. And the horrors that awaited them that night were already set into motion, far beyond their control. In the dark, behind the seemingly innocent invitation to dinner, the couple had already set the wheels in motion. They were on the brink of carrying out the most unimaginable crime, one that would leave a baby lost and 2 women dead. The couple had been driven to this moment by years of desperation. Their obsession had grown, and their moral compass had long since shattered. The calm, collected facade they had built would soon unravel. And what followed would be a twisted culmination of everything they had been plotting. Their plan was about to become a reality. The quiet suburban streets of Sandhausen, a place that seemed worlds away from the horrors unfolding in Ukraine, became the backdrop for one of the most calculated crimes imaginable. The couple had spent weeks laying the groundwork, but it was in the final days leading up to March 6, 2024, that the true depth of their planning began to surface. Every detail, every move they made, was carefully thought out. Nothing would be left to chance. They had already gained the trust of the mother and grandmother through their role as volunteers. But they knew that mere words wouldn't be enough to ensure complete compliance. The victims needed to believe that the couple was not only kind but also completely relatable. This meant establishing a bond that would be impossible to break. And for that, the couple would go to extreme lengths. The wife, in particular, had an idea that would make the deception more believable. She would pretend to be pregnant. For months, she had been faking a pregnancy, wearing loose clothing to hide her abdomen, buying maternity items, and even attending fake doctor's appointments. She meticulously crafted a story of her own struggles with infertility and miscarriage, building a narrative that would resonate with the mother. She needed them to see her as a sympathetic figure, someone who understood the pain of losing a child. The couple also took another critical step in their deception, creating a fictitious child. They knew that without a child, their plan would be exposed. So they forged a birth certificate for a baby they would never have, a baby they would never hold. The birth certificate, an official-looking document, was their ticket to a future that had no place for the woman and her mother. This wasn't the first time the couple had resorted to lies, but this was the first time they had so coldly manipulated every aspect of their lives for such a brutal purpose. They were playing a long game, one with deadly stakes, and they were fully committed. By the time the day of the meeting arrived, they had convinced the victims that they were trustworthy, that they were there to help, to support, and to guide them through the overwhelming challenges of their new lives in Germany. The offer of a meal, a simple dinner at a local restaurant, seemed harmless. After all, the mother and grandmother had already accepted the couple's help with translations and settling in. A meal was just another gesture of goodwill. But this meal would be anything but ordinary. The couple had already made sure the restaurant meeting would be the perfect opportunity. They knew where the restaurant was, they knew how to arrive undetected, and they knew exactly what they had to do once the victims were under their control. They were prepared. The plan was deceptively simple. The victims would be drugged, incapacitated, and once their bodies were no longer a threat, the couple would take the baby. The infant, still fragile and innocent, was the key to their future. When the mother and grandmother arrived at the restaurant, they greeted the couple warmly, unaware that this would be the last peaceful moment they would ever experience. They sat down to eat, perhaps sharing stories, discussing their lives and the futures they hoped for. But all the while, the couple was quietly observing them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The wife subtly slipped something into the drinks, an odorless, tasteless substance that would render the victims unconscious. It was a slow-acting drug, designed to lull them into a stupor without raising any suspicion. The couple had planned this part of the crime with unnerving precision. The timing had to be perfect. If the drug didn't take effect at exactly the right moment, everything could unravel. And then, it happened. The mother and grandmother, who had only moments before been engaged in casual conversation, suddenly fell silent. Their eyes began to droop, their words became slurred. The couple remained calm, pretending to be concerned, playing their roles to perfection. They were in control every step of the way. Within minutes, both women were unconscious, slumped in their chairs, unaware of the horror that was about to unfold. The couple had made sure the timing was flawless, and now there was no turning back. The next phase of their plan began. They quickly and silently moved the women from the restaurant to a vehicle waiting outside. No one saw them. No one heard them. The couple had been thorough, ensuring that the entire operation was executed without a single hitch. No witnesses. No interruptions. Just a carefully crafted plan being carried out in chilling silence. Once in the car, the real brutality of their plan became clear. They had chosen to kill both women before taking the baby, ensuring there would be no witnesses, no possibility of the women trying to stop them. The grandmother, the older of the two victims, was the first to be dealt with. She was bludgeoned, struck with a blunt object until life had drained from her body. The cruelty of the act was staggering, yet for the couple, it was simply the next step in their mission. They had already convinced themselves that what they were doing was justified, that they were entitled to this new life. After disposing of the grandmother's body in a nearby lake, the couple turned their focus to the mother. She too had to die. They had no choice. Her death would ensure that there were no loose ends, no way for her to interfere with the kidnapping of her child. The couple didn't hesitate. They set her body on fire, intending to destroy all evidence, to leave nothing behind that could be traced back to them. The flames would erase the truth, and in its place would be the twisted narrative they had constructed for themselves. By the time the police arrived at the scene, the couple had already achieved their goal. They had taken the baby. The crime had been executed with unsettling precision. Every move had been calculated. Every decision made with the certainty of those who believe they are in control, that they can shape the world to fit their desires. But even the most carefully laid plans can go awry. The couple may have thought they were invincible, but they had left a trail behind them. They had underestimated one thing, one small detail that would unravel everything they had worked so hard to build. The baby had been taken. But the story was far from over. The cruelty of the act was staggering, yet for the couple, it was simply the next step in their mission. The mother, meanwhile, was still unconscious. She had no idea what was happening, no idea that her life was about to meet the same violent fate as her mother's. She was, for now, a passive participant in a scenario beyond her comprehension. But that would change soon. She was an obstacle, nothing more. The fire was meant to destroy all evidence, to erase everything that might lead back to them. And in that moment, as the flames consumed the woman's body, the couple must have thought that they had outsmarted the world. No one would ever know. No one would ever trace this act back to them. But they had overlooked one critical factor: the baby. The infant, still only 5 weeks old, was the true prize. And as the flames flickered and the bodies were burned and discarded, the couple quietly took the child, slipping away into the night. What the couple hadn't accounted for was the reaction to the sudden disappearance of 2 women. 2 mothers who had, just hours earlier, been seen alive, interacting with their newfound friends. Their absence was not something that could simply be ignored. Questions began to surface. The authorities started to ask questions that the couple wasn't prepared to answer. Meanwhile, as the fire burned and the body of the mother was reduced to ashes, the police were starting to piece together something far more disturbing. The disappearance of the 2 women had been noticed quickly. The timing of their meeting, the strange nature of the event, and the absence of any rational explanation sparked immediate suspicion. The police quickly launched an investigation, piecing together the scant evidence that remained. They turned to the location where the meeting had taken place, the restaurant. They quickly began to retrace the victims' movements, looking for any sign, any detail that could point them in the right direction. Days passed. The couple, assuming their plans were complete, had no idea that the investigation was already underway. They had taken every precaution, or so they thought. But the investigation began to uncover inconsistencies, anomalies that couldn't be explained away by mere coincidence. Then came the discovery. On March 7th, just 1 day after the bodies had been disposed of, the police received a tip-off. A witness, a person who had been near the lake, had seen something. A vehicle, suspiciously parked, had caught their attention. The body of the grandmother was discovered first, discarded in the lake, her life extinguished with cold precision. The search intensified, and it wasn't long before the second body was found. The mother's remains had been charred beyond recognition, her body burned to an unrecognizable state in an attempt to erase every trace of her existence. The investigation was now in full swing. Authorities, piecing together the evidence, started to unravel the details of the crime. Forensic analysis revealed the presence of accelerants near the charred remains, the unmistakable signs of a calculated effort to destroy the evidence. The mother had been murdered, but the baby was missing. The police had no leads, no clear suspects, and yet they could feel the pressure mounting. Time was slipping away. The child was still out there, somewhere. And the more the investigation unfolded, the clearer it became. Whoever had done this had meticulously planned everything, right down to the last detail. But they had underestimated one thing: the resilience of the truth. As the investigation deepened, the couple, convinced they had escaped their crime, couldn't know how close they were to being caught. They had left behind a trail that would lead straight to them. What had begun as a seemingly flawless plan was about to unravel, piece by piece. The authorities were closing in, and the truth, no matter how carefully hidden, had a way of revealing itself. The hunt for the baby was just beginning. The early days of the investigation were marked by confusion and mounting pressure. The bodies of the grandmother and mother had been found, but with no witnesses, no clear suspects, and no obvious motive, the case seemed insurmountable. The investigators had little to work with, only the scorched remnants of a life taken too soon, and the chilling sense that they were racing against time to uncover a truth that was already slipping away. But the police weren't ready to concede defeat. They knew something had gone wrong. The mother and grandmother had trusted the wrong people, and those people were now hiding in plain sight. Every detail, no matter how small, became significant. Every lead, no matter how faint, was pursued with tenacity. It was during the first few days of the investigation that the authorities uncovered the first real piece of evidence: the telegram group. The group had been where the couple had first made contact with the victims. The couple had posed as volunteers, offering help, support, guidance to the refugees. Investigators quickly realized that this was no ordinary group. It was a well-established network of refugees and volunteers, with people from all over the world seeking assistance in adjusting to life in Germany. It seemed innocuous enough at first, a helpful community for those in need, but there, lurking among the names and the messages, was the couple. The investigators began to sift through the group's activity, looking for anything that might stand out. And then, the breakthrough came. Through an analysis of the group's messages, investigators found communication between the couple and the mother. Nothing was overtly suspicious in the conversations at first, but the timing was critical. The couple had been in constant contact with the mother leading up to the meeting at the restaurant. They had arranged the dinner, exchanged pleasantries, even offered reassurances about their intentions. The couple's behavior had been calculated. And now, as investigators traced the timestamps, they saw the creeping path that led to the fatal meal, the trap that had been set. But that wasn't all. The police had access to the couple's phone records, and it wasn't long before they uncovered an unsettling pattern. The couple had made several calls and sent numerous messages in the hours before the murder. The messages, carefully timed, expertly crafted, revealed a chilling insight into their state of mind. The couple had been planning for weeks, even months. They had prepared every aspect of the crime with meticulous attention to detail, from the fake pregnancy to the forged birth certificate. They had even scouted the perfect location for the murder. The messages revealed an eerie calm, a sense of assurance as they executed their plans, confident that they would get away with it. Then came the phone call that would change everything. One of the couple's phones had pinged in an area close to the scene of the crime on the night of the murders. The authorities had suspected that the couple had been near the restaurant, but this phone data confirmed it. They had been there, just as the victims had been, just as the murder had occurred. But there was more. The most damning evidence came from the couple's own home. The police executed a search warrant on their property, hoping to find something, anything, that might link them to the crime. What they found was damning. The couple had kept the infant, the stolen child, hidden in their home. The baby, though alive and safe, had been taken, ripped from the only family she had ever known. The couple, in their delusion, had truly believed they could raise the child as their own. The baby's very existence was a testament to the horror they had wrought. The infant was taken into protective custody immediately. The relief of finding her alive was tempered by the brutal realization of what had been done to get her. But her rescue was only the first step. Now, the investigators had to focus on the couple, on how to bring them to justice. The arrest came swiftly after the search. The couple, still unaware of how close the authorities had gotten, were taken into custody without incident. The shock of the arrest reverberated through the community. It seemed impossible that the couple, so ingrained in the fabric of the local life, could have committed such horrific acts. But as the pieces came together, it became clear the couple was guilty. The interrogation was tense. The investigators pressed them for answers, each question carefully constructed to expose the truth. The couple was caught off guard, but there was no denying the evidence against them. They had left a trail of messages, phone records, and forensics that painted a clear picture. Still, they remained calm, collected, at least outwardly. It wasn't until the weight of the evidence became undeniable that the truth began to unfold. The wife, initially silent, finally broke. She confessed. The meticulous planning, the lies, the deaths, it all came pouring out. She spoke about the desperation, the obsession with having a child, and the decision to steal one. She spoke of the fake pregnancy, the telegram group, the meal, and the murders. She revealed how they had drugged the victims, how they had killed the grandmother, how they had set fire to the mother's body. And then, with chilling finality, she confessed to taking the infant. It was a confession that left little to the imagination. The husband, after hearing his wife's account, followed suit. He too confessed, speaking in a matter-of-fact tone about the plan they had executed. Their calmness in the face of such horrific acts made it all the more disturbing. They had seen their actions as necessary, justified, right down to the baby they had taken. As the confession unfolded, investigators pieced together the final details. The couple had not acted in a fit of rage, nor had they been driven by any grand delusions of motherhood. They had simply been consumed by an unrelenting desire, a desire so powerful it had driven them to murder. The trial that followed would be just as meticulous as the crime itself. The evidence was overwhelming, and the confessions left little room for doubt. The forensic evidence, blood found in the couple's car, accelerants on the body of the mother, and phone records that tracked their every move, tied everything together. The baby, now safely in the care of authorities, was the final piece of the puzzle. Her recovery was a bittersweet victory in a case marked by unimaginable tragedy. She had been spared, but her family was gone. The public's outrage was palpable, and the case became a national conversation about the dangers of blind obsession and the vulnerability of refugees in foreign lands. As the couple stood trial, their actions were dissected by the legal system. The sentence would ultimately be handed down, but the question lingered: what drives someone to commit such cold, calculated acts? Was it desperation, mental illness, or something else? The answers would never fully come. But what was clear was that, in the end, a small child's life had been irrevocably altered. And so, with the arrest and confessions in hand, the case reached its conclusion. The baby was safe, but the scars of the crime would endure far beyond the courtroom. The investigation was over. The justice system had done its work. But for the family, the victims, and the community, the effects of this unthinkable crime would echo for years to come. For days, the infant had remained hidden away in a house that was never meant to be hers. Inside those walls, a world had been constructed for her, a world built on deception, on stolen futures, on the broken lives left in the wake of her abduction. She was 5 weeks old, too young to understand the violence that had taken her from her mother's arms. Too young to know that the people holding her were not her family. As investigators closed in, the urgency surrounding the search for the child intensified. The bodies had been found, the truth was unraveling, but one question remained: where was the baby? They knew time was running out. If the couple sensed they were being watched, they could disappear, taking the infant with them. And if that happened, she might never be found. Authorities moved quickly. Using phone records and surveillance footage, they pinpointed the couple's last known location. Their home, an unremarkable house in Sandhausen, tucked away in a quiet neighborhood. To outsiders, it was nothing more than a family residence. But inside, behind closed doors, was a stolen life. The raid was swift. In the early morning hours, a week after the murders, law enforcement surrounded the house. There was no time for negotiation, no room for error. The goal was simple: get inside and get the baby out. When officers entered, they found the couple inside, caught completely off guard. But the most heartbreaking discovery came moments later. In a small, dimly lit room, in a crib that was not hers, lay the infant. She was alive. The moment she was lifted into the arms of an officer, the weight of the case shifted. The horror of what had been done could never be undone, but in this single moment, there was something that resembled justice. A life had been spared. A child had been found before she could disappear into the lie her abductors had created for her. But she was fragile. A baby taken from the only family she had ever known, thrust into the care of those who had murdered her mother and grandmother. The first medical assessment was critical. She was malnourished, dehydrated, and had been kept in conditions that suggested neglect. Though unharmed physically, she had been living in uncertainty, in a house where her existence had been reduced to a possession, a prize in a crime so meticulously planned, yet destined to fall apart. The infant was rushed to the hospital for further evaluation. Doctors confirmed that while she had been deprived of proper care, she would recover. But the question remained: what now? With her mother and grandmother gone, the baby had no immediate family in Germany. Authorities worked swiftly to locate next of kin. In Ukraine, distant relatives were identified. Family members who had once been part of the mother's life but had remained behind when war forced her to flee. Now, in the wake of her murder, they were the closest thing the child had to a family. For the next several weeks, the baby remained in the care of child welfare services, shielded from the public, protected from the trauma she would never remember but would always carry. Her fate was now in the hands of those who had stepped in after the worst had already happened. The rescue was a success. The child had been saved. But in the aftermath of it all, one question lingered. What kind of life awaited a child whose entire world had been taken before she could even understand it? She would never know her mother's voice. She would never feel her grandmother's embrace. She had been spared, but the cost of her survival was immeasurable. In the days that followed, as the trial for the couple loomed, the baby's story became a symbol of both devastation and resilience. A reminder of the horrors inflicted upon the vulnerable, and the hope that still remained in the face of unimaginable loss. She would go on to live. But she would never return to the life she had been meant to have. As the investigation reached its conclusion, the moment everyone had been waiting for was finally upon them. The trial of the couple who had executed such a horrifying crime, leaving 2 women dead and a baby stolen. But for many, the truth was already clear. The confessions had been made. The couple, in the face of overwhelming evidence, had admitted to their roles in the murders and abduction. Yet as the trial began, the courtroom would become the stage for a different battle, a battle over the very nature of justice, and whether such a heinous crime could ever be fully understood or properly judged. The courtroom was packed on the first day of the trial, the air thick with anticipation. As the accused, the 43-year-old woman and her 45-year-old husband, entered the room, their once calm demeanor now betrayed the weight of the moment. They were no longer the quiet couple from Sandhausen. They were now the faces of one of the most chilling crimes in recent German history. From the start, the couple's confessions loomed over the proceedings. They had confessed to everything: the murders, the drugging, the bludgeoning of the grandmother, the fire that destroyed the mother's body, and the abduction of the baby. Every detail of their plan, carefully orchestrated over months, had been laid bare. The defense, however, wasn't about denying the facts. Instead, it sought to present the couple in a different light, one that would allow them to avoid the most severe punishments. The defense's argument was based largely on the couple's psychological state. They claimed that years of failed fertility treatments, repeated miscarriages, and deep emotional trauma had driven them to a point of madness. The wife's obsession with having a child, her emotional fragility, and her inability to cope with loss were presented as mitigating factors. Proof that, in their minds, they had acted out of a desperate need, rather than malice. It was a plea for understanding, as if to say that their actions were a tragic result of overwhelming grief. The couple's lawyer painted a picture of 2 people lost in their grief, unable to see the consequences of their actions. They argued that they had never intended for the victims to die, that the murders had been the tragic result of a plan gone terribly wrong. But despite these pleas for mercy, the weight of the crime was undeniable. The courtroom remained silent as evidence was presented. The drugged drinks, the forged documents, the meticulous planning, and the cold-hearted way in which the couple had murdered the grandmother, burned the mother, and abducted the infant. As the prosecution presented its case, the brutal nature of the crime was impossible to ignore. It wasn't just the murders. It was the calculated way in which the couple had preyed on vulnerable refugees, exploiting their trust for the sole purpose of satisfying their own desires. It wasn't just a crime of passion. It was the result of obsessive thinking, of a twisted belief that they were entitled to something they could never have. And the cost of that obsession had been the lives of 2 innocent women and the destruction of a child's future. The trial continued for weeks, with testimony from forensic experts, law enforcement, and psychologists. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of the couple's disturbed minds, their cold rationality in the face of a crime that defied all logic. And yet, the couple still seemed unable to grasp the full extent of their actions. The wife, in particular, seemed consumed by her obsession, barely able to mask the lingering sense of entitlement that had driven the entire plot. When it was time for the couple to speak in their defense, the courtroom held its breath. The husband, stoic throughout the proceedings, offered little explanation. His role in the murders was never questioned, but he appeared detached, as if he were merely a passive participant in something that had spiraled out of control. The wife, on the other hand, broke down during her statement, acknowledging the pain she had caused but offering little in the way of remorse. Her confession was raw, but it also felt like a final attempt to absolve herself. She had wanted a child, she said, but never realized the depth of her actions until it was too late. The sentencing day arrived, and the room was filled with tension. The public had watched the case unfold, their emotions swinging between disbelief and anger. The child, now safe and recovering in the care of authorities, had become the symbol of both hope and devastation. While the baby's future was uncertain, the perpetrator's future had already been sealed. The question was no longer about their guilt, it was about the severity of the punishment. The court's verdict was swift but still left some shaken. The wife was sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. The husband was also sentenced to life in prison, though his defense had argued for a reduced sentence due to his supposed passivity in the crime. The judgment was a reflection of the gravity of the crime, but some questioned whether the couple's emotional instability and tragic backstory had been sufficiently considered. Were they truly capable of understanding the full weight of their actions, or had they simply been consumed by their own desires? In the aftermath of the trial, the reaction was divided. Many felt the sentences were too lenient, given the brutal nature of the murders and the coldness with which the couple had carried out their plan. Others felt that the couple's mental state warranted compassion, albeit with a sentence that ensured they would never be free again. The case had sparked a national conversation about justice, about the extent to which the psychological state of perpetrators should be considered, and whether the emotional toll of personal loss could ever justify such brutality. For the community in Sandhausen, the verdict brought no real closure. The couple had once been part of their everyday lives. Now, their names were synonymous with betrayal and horror. The town, still reeling from the shock, tried to rebuild, but the stain of the crime was permanent. The victims' families, too, struggled with the aftermath. They would never have their loved ones back, and their grief was compounded by the knowledge that the child, their grandchild, would never know the full truth of what had happened to her family. The case had raised difficult questions that would linger long after the trial ended. What does justice look like when the perpetrators are driven by obsession? When the victims are innocent, yet the killers believe they have a right to take what isn't theirs? How do you reconcile the need for punishment with the complexity of the human psyche? Ultimately, the legal proceedings provided some measure of accountability. The couple would pay for their crimes, but the question of whether they truly understood the gravity of their actions, or whether the justice system could ever fully reckon with the depths of their depravity, remained an open one. For the baby, the survivors of the victims, and the community at large, the story wasn't over. It was merely a chapter in a much larger conversation about what happens when humanity is lost, when trust is betrayed, and when justice is asked to answer for crimes so terrible, no punishment can ever be enough.